Again, yesterday we started talking about the Industrial Revolution, and with it, and this video sounds really bad. Aiden's letting me know that my mic doesn't sound as good when I'm at school. My mic at home is a lot better because it's a really good microphone. But we started talking about the Industrial Revolution yesterday, and I asked you at the end to come up with some predictions of what might happen in the Industrial Revolution. How might society react to this new world they were living in? And what were some of the things that you came up with? What were some ideas of possible outcomes of the Industrial Revolution, either good or bad? What might be some good or bad things that come about due to the Industrial Revolution? Yeah, there might be a fight over resources. What might that lead to? War. Yeah, definitely. What else? We talked about one of them yesterday, right? As cotton production, or as cotton was needed more for textiles, what might increase in other places? Slavery, especially in the southern United States. So that's a negative. As more people move to cities, what might happen? Yeah, it could be overcrowding. As overcrowding takes place. Yeah, food, loss of resources to just too many people being there. People could do without. What's something we still deal with today that comes about due to factories, steam engines, and we're still having issues with this today? Starts with a P. Pollution. So there are a lot of different things that could happen, and we're going to learn about some of the effects of the Industrial Revolution today. There are many things that could be caused by the Industrial Revolution. Some of them are going to be positive, though, and so not a bad thing that we're going to have them go through. I don't know where my clicker is. There we go. All right, there we go. So we learned about the steam engine yesterday. Its significance was what? What did the steam engine allow to happen with factories? Where could factories go then? Anywhere. Why? They didn't have to be on water anymore. So the steam engine was significant for that, but it's also going to be significant for transportation as well. We're going to learn about that in just a minute. The first way that we're going to talk about the Industrial Revolution changing things is in transportation. Canals were first developed, or the first developed form of transportation. Okay, you can kind of see one here. You've seen a canal. You probably might even been down a canal. You've probably all seen barges in the Tennessee River. That is something that's been going on since the Industrial Revolution, because it was a great way to travel or transport goods up and down, the land. It was much faster, and we'll get to that reason why. Canals are connected to bodies of water. I think it's on. They were connected to bodies of water, or a city to a body of water through a man-made canal. We'll talk about how they were man-made and that kind of work in just a minute. But these were very important. By the mid-1800s, 4,250 miles of inland canal cut the cost to transport both raw materials and finished goods throughout England and the rest of the world. The Oxford Canal was completed in 1790. It was a 78-mile canal in central England that connected both Oxford and Bedworth. And you can kind of see it here. It was very small. It's not like it's huge. It's a very small canal, but it was just needed to transport goods. A boat just needed to be able to go up and down this canal and travel from one place to the other. Being able to make stops along the way, being able to transport goods to different places along the way. The Erie Canal in the United States spanned 363 miles and connected the Hudson River and Lake Erie in northern New York. This was a rather long one, but it was a massive change to transportation, both of goods and of people. And like I said, this is important because at this point in time still, you have many, many factories that are sitting on waterways. So they wanted to be able to connect their factories to the cities or to the resource areas to get supplies or to send out product. Here's a picture of the length of the Erie Canal. You can see how many different stops it had along the way, different directions it could go in, and the different places it connected, obviously. But digging canals is not fun. I would not want to have this job. Imagine having to dig these man-made canals. Imagine having to dig basically a river. It would not be something. Anybody dug a ditch before? I have with a machine. That's a much easier process than having to do it by hand. It's not fun though. Mason, did you have to do it by hand or did you have to do it with a trencher?
So me and my dad
Yeah.
got shovel and dug out another part of our ditch. So it would
drain properly. Yeah. It wasn't fun.
Yeah.
You thought no, it wasn't fun. Yeah, it was not fun, right? Now imagine doing that for, a canal the size of this room. And it's got to be deep because the boat's got to be, it's got to be as deep as this room too. So, that's not fun. It was very grueling work, very tough work, about like running ladders, Bryson. About like that. You don't want to do it all the time. So this was a much faster way to ship goods, but it was very grueling work to create these canals. So they came up with another way of transporting goods, roads. See, we think about it now, this is normal, right? Y'all all came to school today and you drove on a road or you rode on a bus and, whatever you did to get here. But that back when we're talking about the Industrial Revolution, there was not good roads. They were not very good. Most of them, that's why the canals were better transportation methods, because roads were just muddy paths. And you didn't have, mudding trucks. Gavin, you got a mudding truck? You going to have one probably? Get old big mud tires? I would. That's just me. Mine's like a crappy truck. But either way, they didn't have the stuff that we have now. So you needed, a different way of transporting goods. Well, they started to develop better roads. The McAdam roads, created by John McAdam, were better roads. Now, would this be considered a good road in our day and age? What is that right there? It's a dirt road, right? We don't think of that as a good road. The difference is that this road is perfect for what we're talking about in the Industrial Revolution. They didn't have good roads. They had muddy paths for wagons. And so they started taking or layering large stones beneath smaller stones to create dirt roads, but were much better options to travel on than in the past. And so you can kind of see that here where they have the crushed stone or the large stone, and then they can come back and crush the stones on top of it, pack it in there real good, and it's going to stay there. Much like probably, I have a driveway that's still dirt, dirt. Anybody got a dirt driveway? Most of you, some of you. Most of y'all are lucky. I need to get mine paved, but I live on the end of a dirt road as well, so I know all about it. It's not the best. We think of nice roads now that are paved, and but who pays for our roads now? Do y'all pay for our roads? You technically do, but who makes our roads? Yeah, cities, governments, all those things. Well, back then, sorry, I forgot this one. It allowed for easier movement of wagons on these roads. But back then, these roads were not so easy to come by in terms of the government building them. Private companies would build McAdam roads for profit. So you also had these people building these roads. Well, how do they get paid for building this road? Well, you paid to use it. A pike would be installed to block your path, and you would only be allowed to turn or use the road once you paid a fee. And so it was basically a toll road. Has anybody been to Florida on the toll bridge? Gigantic bridge you got to pay? Yeah, right? Get stuck there for hours, right? Because waiting on everybody to pay. It's terrible. Well, that's the way that these kind of things happen. These turnpikes allowed private investors to make a profit while providing roads. So this is the start of this road system that we have in this country. Okay? And these are modern toll roads today. So you have transportation changing in terms of canals, you have roads. What other way that transportation might be improved? What kind of engines? Yeah, and what are they going to be used on? Yeah, exactly. So James Watt's steam engine helped give the rise to faster transportation methods. This doesn't look like a good steam engine, does it, though? Like this is definitely a steam engine. This is exactly how it works. The very good model of a steam engine. But that doesn't look like a train, does it? Now, this model right here would be used in boats. Actually, it would be used on locomotives as well. Steamboats really came about during this time as well. Steam could be used to propel boats in the steam engine. The American inventor, Robert Fulton, ordered a steam engine from James Watt in 1807, and he put it in his steamboat called the Clermont, which made its first successful trip in 1807, and later ferried passengers up and down New York's Hudson River. So the steam engine we just saw could be put in a steamboat, and this was important because it could push these steamboats up and down the river. So now you weren't just allowed. It's very similar to how during the age of exploration, the caravel allowed them to sail against the wind, and so they could do more. Well, now you could travel up and down the river, so you could transport goods more quickly, more efficiently, faster, and you could make more of a profit. So all these inventions were based on the idea of doing things better. It's progress. This ideas of the Enlightenment. We can be better. We can do more. The Industrial Revolution is all about that in just industry. Then you have railroads. Now this looks like the railroad. Yes. This looks like the railroad at Tuscumbia Park, or Tuscumbia Spring Park, right? The little one that you get on and you ride around as a little kid. That's what this looks like to me. But railroads were first developed in England. Again, we talked about yesterday, the Industrial Revolution began in England. Pretty much everything that comes out of England or starts comes out of England. Okay. Steam locomotives would ride on iron rails or steel rails that were laid on the ground. How they came up with the distance? Who wants to guess how they came up with the distance between one rail and the other? Just take a wild guess. You have two rails that the trains ride on. How did they come up with that distance? Why that distance? Kind of, but not really.
That was how long the parts were.
Yes, but why? It's the distance that wagons were made. They literally, what happened is many of the railways that were created during this time were based off of the old muddy wagon roads. And there were these tracks that were left in the roads based off the wagons. And so instead of trying to deviate from the road, they just threw the tracks down in those muddy tracks, and that became the standard definition of a steam locomotive. And so there it was. So they took something old and made it new. These could carry large loads in a relatively short period of time. Again, the only thing a steam engine needs is more coal. What does a horse need to carry more stuff? Food, water. Like it's got to be, rested. Steam engine doesn't have to be rested unless it blows up. They did a good bit. They did blow up. Pressure eventually builds up, and if something goes wrong, explosions. In 1804, an English engineer named Richard Trevithick won a bet of several $1,000s. He did this by hauling 10 tons of iron nearly 10 miles on a track in a steam-driven locomotive. His ideas were later improved by George Stephenson. In 1825, he built the first railroad line from Yorkshire coal mine to the port of Stockton. It ran 27 miles, and it used 4 locomotives that he had designed and built. We have this massive change in transportation. And you think about this is all still around today. You can go and ride a train cross country. You can goats and see all these canals. You obviously use roads. Y'all are all about to use roads, right? You're all excited about to get a car or get to drive. You know, all these things from the Industrial Revolution. It's like, how does history affect us? Well, the Industrial Revolution happens. How much longer would it have taken to get the things that we have? So, the first commercial railway was the Liverpool to Manchester Railway. And so this is like where they take people. It was called the Rocket. If something's called the Rocket, what do you think it does?
It goes upward.
It goes upward. It goes fast, right? So how fast do you think this thing went?
10 miles an hour. 20 miles an hour.
It's a little bit faster than that. About 24 miles an hour. About as fast as Bryson runs. I'm just kidding. Bryson doesn't run that fast. He's slow. Aiden is fast, but I don't know if he runs 25 miles an hour. 25 miles an hour is getting it. That's flying. That's like me running. Easton might be faster than me, maybe. We'll find out one day. But this first train, called the Rocket, traveled 24 miles an hour with a load full of passengers. So that's not bad. It's not bad. Aiden, can you run 25 miles an hour? There you go. Not can you run 25 miles in an hour. Can you run that fast? Which would be the same thing, by the way. If you can run 25 miles an hour, you can run 25 miles in an hour. But I don't think you could do it. Yeah, go ask AutoZone about that. What is this? Is it? Does that look like a train to y'all? Does that look like a steam engine train, like a locomotive? Because I know what y'all think of when y'all think of trains. Y'all think of the one that goes around the tree at Christmas time, right? That you put down on the ground, it rolls around, it's all pretty. Yeah, this is actually the first train built in the United States, called the Tom Thumb. Yes, very interesting, right? Because it doesn't look like a train. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the Tom Thumb, that's a steam engine on it. It gets pressure in it. It goes up and down with the piston. Next thing you know, the wheels start moving and the train moves. It was nicknamed the Iron Horse. Why is it nicknamed the Iron Horse? It's made of iron. And what? And it moves. Yeah. It was nicknamed the Iron Horse since it's more reliable than a horse, faster, and can pull larger loads. Yes, sir. Yes, when they're. Oh yeah, and that's a good time period because that's the mid 1800s because it's following the Civil War in that movie, and there's a lot of iron and all the metal stuff that they're doing, you know, and that's when the first Continental Railroad. I think this is a big part of their movie. So that's some good stuff to think about. That's about the right time period, but yeah. So yesterday we talked about this movement of people. Well, they had to move. A good question that I was asked earlier was, well, why did they have to? Well, what happened during the Industrial Revolution, or kind of to spur the Industrial Revolution, was that large landowners bought up all the public land they could. They had these huge farms. So people didn't have land to work anymore. There was no public land for them to go and garden and farm and make a profit. So they had to move to the cities. And then the cities start growing. And so as people left the countryside, factories had little trouble finding enough workers. Is that going to be a good thing or a bad thing for the workers? Bad. Why? Why would they not get a job? That's right. There's so many people that they may not get one. What does that also mean for the amount of money they're going to get paid to work? Not a lot, right? Supply and demand. In 1800, about 1 in 10 people lived in London in Great Britain. Now, there were over 100,000 people living in London during this time. The number of cities in Europe that boasted more than 100,000 inhabitants rose from 22 to 47 from 1800 to 1850. And this led to a period of urbanization. What do you think urbanization is? If you live in a rural area, you live in a very what kind of area? Country. So what is an urban area? City. So what do you think urbanization is? Moving to the cities, also the building up of cities. Because cities don't usually go out very much, right? Go up, like this one. Okay? So the cities start building up, things start breaking down. Sanitary codes, all these things, they're not put in place. Pollution, overcrowding, disease, all these things start really messing up in the cities. This movement or urbanization is really a negative effect of the industrialization or the Industrial Revolution. This happened in the United States as well, just a little bit later. It happened in Germany. It happened in many other places. But it was later than in Great Britain. Like I said, this large population drove down wages, just simple supply and demand. You'll learn economics when you get to be a senior. But supply and demand means that there's more workers than there was money to pay them. So they just drove wages down. And it created very poor working conditions. The factory owners didn't really care about their workers because, they could just replace you. You were very replaceable. If Bryson wants $5 to do the job and Mason will do it for $4, who am I going to hire? Mason. I don't care. He might do it for free, apparently. So they had no real power over their employment. They had no rules and laws against how they employed people. So people worked 12 to 16 hours a day. Now, how many hours a day do you go to school? 7. Okay. So let's just say we'll go in the middle. They work 14-hour days. So let's double your day, and you got to go on Saturdays. How do you feel? You got to spend twice the amount of time with me, and you got to see me an extra day. Now, I know that y'all are all happy about that, but think about all the other teachers you got to see. That'd be terrible, right? No, I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness, y'all had it so bad. Think about this. What they would do every day, that's all you're doing this week. Because you're only here 2 days. So you're only going to be here 14 hours this week. They would do that normally in 1 day. And you think it's bad for you. You're 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, right? They had no vacation. No holidays. You just had a whole week off. Y'all have sick days, right? Y'all miss. You get sick, you can come back, right? COVID. They didn't have no COVID days. You sick, you lose your job. Because guess what? If Bryson's sick, guess what I can do? I can hire Mason. Because there's plenty of them. I can hire a guy just like Bryson. There's so many workers, they didn't have to wait and hire somebody or make them come back. They just hire somebody else. Machines were not very safe either. These factories were very, very, very unsafe. There was no codes. There was no rules. There was no OSHA. It was just do whatever you want. So machines were often unsafe. People got injured, even got killed. We usually read a pretty graphic story about a girl that gets pulled into the machine. She literally gets pulled into these machines. You can kind of see it right here. This machine would be spinning at a very high rate to spin the yarn that is going through it. And why would they use children over adults on these machines? What's the advantage of a child versus an adult? They're smaller. So they can reach in there and fix things and do things that you need to. But they can also reach in there and get pulled in by something that might get them. And this little girl did. And they talk about the crushing of bones and things like that. So it's fairly graphic, and it gives you a good representation of what's going on. But you can see this kid's barefoot. He's got loose clothing. He's standing on the machine. None of those things are safe. But that's what they did back then. Okay? Children, often as young as 5, worked in the factories to support their families. So y'all think you got it rough going to school 7 hours a day. They work 12 to 14-hour days at 5. With no Christmas. With no Thanksgiving. But eventually we, wisen up. We start passing laws that outlaw child labor. In 1833, they prohibited workers under the age of 9 with the Factory Act. This also increased education for these people. Education during this time would, I got this somewhere, would go from basically no education to giving money to improve education, make it available to children, had to attend school no less than 2 hours a day. I know y'all would enjoy that, right? Just 2 hours of schooling every day. But the Industrial Revolution is where this gets started, of you going to school all the time. Children from 9 to 12 were limited to 8 hours a day of work. For kids your age, 12 hours a day. Like I said, in still terrible conditions. So if people keep working and under terrible conditions, how do you think they felt about their situation? How do you think people felt about working in just terrible conditions and not getting paid very much? Do we tend to enjoy that? No. So poor working conditions led to workers fighting back. A group called the Luddites, named after Ned Ludd, who supposedly broke 2 stocking frames due to poor treatment, start to revolt against the different factory owners and employers that they had. So much so that workers in France threw wooden shoes called sabots into the machines to disrupt production. This is where the word sabotage does come from. Trying to sabotage everything. Eventually, they've had enough. Now, I've heard y'all say this before. Can students do this to get better conditions? What do workers do to try to get better conditions? Protest, or what we call it, starts with an S, strike. And so workers eventually create labor unions. How do you think the employers felt about labor unions and strikes? Not good. It's going to cost them money. So these people start fighting for workers' rights. Sorry. Try to get that one. And they start going on strike when their demands are not met. Now, again, most employers don't care because these are low-skilled employees, meaning they don't have any real skills. They don't have anything really helping them gain their job, so they just replace them. That's when the strikers had to resort to violence. They resorted to violence to compel factory owners to do what they want them to do. And this made them call in private police forces to control the workers. For example, the Pinkerton Agency used at the Pullman factory in Chicago. Basically, this group of individuals would make sure that the rioters, protesters, strikers were not destroying property. So this was a time period where, they were trying to get what they wanted. And eventually things will change. There's a lot of reform. Obviously, we don't work like that now. You can't work, you can work 40 hours, then you got to get paid overtime. Y'all don't work. You're required to go to school for 7 hours a day. So there's a lot of changes that have come about from this time period. And you'll read more about this a little bit later on. One of the last major effects of the Industrial Revolution is that there's a huge gap between the rich and the poor. The rich people continue to be or continue to grow in their wealth, and the poor get worse. This is one of the worst parts of capitalism. It's also a good part of capitalism because you can make as much money as you want, but it's one of the worst parts as well. So like I said, we've learned about some positives and negatives. Transportation changes, urbanization of city building, that's a negative. Population increase, that could be considered both positive or negative in the way you look at it. The disparity between the poor and the rich is a good thing for some and a bad thing for others. Better education would come about. And overall, people would have higher standards of living, but they were still very poor. So like you lived a better life than your predecessors. Like you all live probably better lives than anybody that's ever been on the face of the earth up until this point. But do we still have poor people? Yeah, like our poor people probably live better lives than most people did back then. But they're still poor in relation to nowadays. So that's what the Industrial Revolution does. Is it changes our perception of what poor looks like. And so we'll get into the effects of this a little bit next week. But what happens is with all these problems, the government's going to decide to step in. But what we do is we develop three systems that somewhat work, somewhat don't. Communism, socialism, and capitalism. Because see, up until the Industrial Revolution, who controlled all the finances in a country? Yes, for the most part, but who exactly? Bigger. Bigger. One guy. Yeah, or a king, queen. The one leader controlled all the economics. So with the Enlightenment, with the revolutions that have gone on with the governments, people have more of a say. And so the government does have to step in and figure out how to control the situation or to not control the situation, in terms of capitalism. Okay, we'll learn about that next week. That's where we're going to stop for today. We'll start talk about capitalism, communism, and socialism next week. So you can make sure you keep up with that. If you're at home watching this video, make sure you do your packet for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. It's 3 activities on child labor, inventions, and the effects of the Industrial Revolution. If you have any questions, send me an email, and have a great day.